One morning, Ta'a came in and said to my dad, I want you to put your best clothes on today. Of course, they only spoke in Skohomish. They didn't speak English. But I can't speak that language because my dad refused to let me learn it. And I'll explain that later. But Dad got very excited and said, are we going to a potlatch? Are we going someplace special? Why am I getting dressed up? And she said, you have to go to school. The Indian agent said it's time for you to go to school. And he said, what school? And she said, they have to educate you in the white man's way. We don't have a choice, grandson. So she packed up little blankets with their special, they had very few belongings, some bread, and there was Simon and his two brothers and two girls that were his cousins. And the uncle took them, and they walked along the railroad tracks until they got to where the ferry is, went across on the ferry, and they met the Indian agent there. And the uncle asked if he could come with them until they got to the school, and they said yes. So he said it was a very, very long day. They had to catch a train, and they were going to Lytton. And Dad was 7 years old at this time. And he said when they finally arrived, they were stopping along the way and picking up kids from other places. And every reserve village has a little bit different dialect so that they couldn't understand each other. When they finally reached the train station, there was a horse and wagon there, and all of the children got pushed in the wagon, and there was no water. It was August. It was hot. And Dad at this time thought it was an adventure. So the uncle got into, and it was about an hour and a half before they got to the school. And he entered the school with excitement, but he said he didn't understand it. He had a bad feeling about it. And his uncle got to spend the night, and so he could catch the train the next morning. And before he left, he said to the master or principal, whatever they called him in those days, said, you better talk to your grandsons or your nephews because they're already in trouble. And he goes, what did they do? They slept on the floor, not on the bed. He says, but in our culture, in our village, only the elders sleep on the bed. Shows lack of respect to sleep on a bed. Well, here they must sleep on the bed. So he talked to the boys and said that make sure you sleep on the bed, not under it. So away went the uncle, and Dad said that was the saddest day of his life, watching him walk away. And he said that he learned very quickly to keep your head down, your mouth shut, and to follow orders. And it was supposed to be a school, but most of the time they were learning religion. And for 5 hours a day, they did farm work. 2 hours a day, they did reading and writing. And they had maybe an hour of playtime. For breakfast every day, it was oatmeal, no change. Sometimes it had maggots in it. They barely got any protein. It was all potatoes, things that they had grown themselves out there. But Dad said this is where he developed his leadership skills, because he could see the suffering in some of the children, and he tried to be the big brother to everybody to help them stay calm and not let them get in trouble. And then one day they were working in the barn, and they were throwing the hay down. There was about 5 boys in there. And one of the boys decided he had to have a pee. So like any little boy, he walked to the edge of the loft and peed, but he didn't realize the master was below him, and he peed on his head. So of course all the boys giggled, and that was a big mistake. So then the master yelled and said, "Get down here now, all of you." And they stood in a line. He says, "I want to know who did it, and I want to know now." And it was one of the littler guys, and my dad was just ready to step forward and protect him, and the boy jumped forward and said, "I did it." Well, the master was so mad at the fact that the boys laughed that he took a leather belt, thick, that they used for the cattle, and he whipped that boy so bad. There was blood everywhere. The kid was crying and screaming. And my dad said, "I just felt sick to my stomach." So that night he said to his brothers, "Let's run away. I can't take it." And he'd already been there a couple of years. It took him that point to sort of say, "Okay, I'm out of here." So they snuck away, and they had to jump on the freight trains, ride the freight trains, eat out of garbage cans. They rode the train as far as Port Moody, and then they had to walk all the way in to Granville Street, beg 5 cents for the ferry, come across on the ferry, and then walk all along the train tracks till they came to their village. And their grandma was so happy, Mary Kaplan was so happy to see them. But at the same time, she felt very anxious. And she fed them. She said, "Boys, you cannot stay here. The Indian agent will be back. You have to go. Your uncle's canoe's up there. You take your uncle's canoe. I'll pack you food. You go to our village in Upper Squamish. Your aunties and uncles will look after you." So she packed bread and seafood, and the boys dragged the canoe down, waited for high tide, and off they went. Well, by then it was starting to be dusk and dark, and then a storm came in, and they got really scared, and Dad said, "I thought for sure I was going to drown because the waves were so huge." So they ended up coming in near Point Atkinson and pulling the canoe in, turning it upside down, and then they slept underneath it, all cuddled. The next morning, he said he got up and it was a beautiful sunny day. Dad said, "Oh, felt so good to have the sun on me, and I feel that freedom." And so they got in the canoe, ate the food that they had, and paddled. And it took them all day to go up Howe Sound. And our villages were always right on the water, so the homes were right there, and they could see the canoe coming in, the people in the village, so they were waving. And Dad and his brothers got there, and they got hugs, and everybody was happy. And he said they managed to stay there almost 2 weeks before the RCMP and the Indian agent came for them and took them back. So the second time he tried to take off, it was only one of his brothers would go. And they came all the way down. And he said it took longer than the first time. But when he got to Ta's house, the Indian agent was sitting right there. So he didn't even get to spend one night with her. Got hauled back again. The third time, he met a friend from Kamloops, and he says, Cy, why are you always going to the city? Run away, we can live off the land up here." Dad thinks, "Oh, that's a good idea." So there they go, sneaking out again. And Dad's not, he can live off the forest, off the sea, but not in a dry area like Kamloops that's all different vegetation. And he couldn't find any berries, anything to eat. He was hungry. And then one night he was laying on the ground sleeping, and he felt something slither over him. And he said, I've never felt something so scary in my life. I don't know if it was a snake, a lizard, or something I've never felt. And he said he climbed up the tree and hung over the branch like a monkey and slept the rest of the night there. And he said to his friend, that's it, I'm going back. I'm too hungry. So he went back for the last time and said, I might as well finish here. So I'd like to read you one chapter out of his book, and it's important to hear his words. It's called Brother Jim Dies at School. My brother Jim died at the school. He was 13 years old. He had spinal meningitis. I remember clearly there was a new building put up for the older boys. When my brother Jim got very sick, he was put in this building to be with me. Jim had bad headaches. I used to hear him crying at night. I asked the principal to take him to the hospital. He didn't. After about 2 weeks, my brother was in so much pain. He was going out of his mind. I pleaded with the principal for days. For God's sake, you better do something for my brother. They finally took him to the small hospital in Lytton. Each day I would ask how he was doing, and they'd say, he's doing all right. On the third day, on a Sunday night, the principal's wife came in, spoke to her husband, and called me in the office. There they told me that my brother had passed away. I went to the hospital with the principal. There lay my brother Jim in a room that was like a morgue. A coffin was ordered from Kamloops, and the next day the principal told me I had to go with him to put my brother in the coffin. I used to be afraid of dead people. I always had that fear. But when I went down there and seen my brother, we washed him and put some clothes on him. But the coffin was too short. And that's the thing I couldn't believe, that they wouldn't order another coffin. He had been dead for 24 hours, so we had to break his knees to put him in the coffin. It was hot out. The body started to smell. When I got back to the school, I could smell that odor. It stayed with me for a while. But from then on, I wasn't afraid of dead people. I guess my brother did take that fear from me by handling him myself. We phoned my grandmother to tell her of Jim's death, so she came up to go back by train to North Vancouver with the body. I went with her. We took the body to the undertaker. My grandmother said to them, you order a new coffin, a good one that my grandson can fit in. We buried my brother in the Squamish Cemetery in North Vancouver. These are the words of my late father.